Hey everyone, it's been about 5 months, I think, since I've last recorded an episode here. Truth be told, I've actually been working through what you would describe essentially as a nervous breakdown. I know that's a bit of an outdated term nowadays, but it's sort of a product of a whole different series of experiences. And for me anyway, it was high anxiety and burnout and a bit of uncertainty around, who I was becoming, or who I am becoming rather. So I had to take some time away to really think about all of these factors, get myself in order, go back and complete some therapy of my own. What came of it actually was a really enjoyable experience just writing on Substack, and I've actually got the link to my Substack account in the top of my YouTube channel here, which I would love it if you checked out. You can read about my recovery process, I suppose, what it entailed. Hopefully it's a benefit to you. The last thing that I would want is that my writing is purely just about me. Part of the big reason why, as a therapist, but also as a content creator, the reason why I create this content is to give you an insight behind the curtain, as they say. If you can imagine Wizard of Oz, what's going on behind the curtain. Hopefully that helps, because at the end of the day, we're all just fellow travelers here on this earth. We're not going to be here for a very long time. And just because I have, certain skills, certain training, doesn't mean that shouldn't be offered to you as well. Because at the end of the day, I'm not what I do, I'm who I am, right? Just as you are as well. So, but yeah, I took a long time actually, and I'm still just sort of touching down from it, and this is something that I often try to tell people when I'm working with someone who is struggling with, a bit of a nervous breakdown or high anxiety or panic attacks or whatever it is. The last thing that you want to do is to put a timeline on things and just allow the change to occur. And for me, and again, I'll drop a link with some of the articles that I wrote about. For me, it was a panic attack, which precipitated this breakdown / breakthrough, followed by a lot of intrusive thoughts, a lot of physical experiences, a lot of physical sensations, and then a movement into what's described as the letdown effect, where your body just basically goes into full-on shutdown mode. Think like hibernation in the winter, but 1,000 times slower, I suppose you could say, unless hibernation is you just sleeping all the time, right? And a lot of people experience the letdown effect as a depression, but depression is a little bit different, and I elucidate that in the article, which I'll drop down below in the description. But the letdown effect isn't coupled with this sense of, it's not usually coupled with this sense of worthlessness. And that's a big factor in depression. People who experience depression have this sense of worthlessness, of not being enough, of the world being better off without me, that kind of thing. Whereas when you're recovering from high stress, burnout, high anxiety, that kind of thing, there's this collapsing into the self, but it's not really coupled with that worthlessness that I've been talking about. And then you start to feel like you're wandering a little bit. And in the article, I go through a series of stages. And ironically, the thing that led to my burnout was also the thing that helped me recover from it, which was my master's degree in counseling and psychotherapy. So what I learned from that training, I was able to sort of observe myself and be my own client, really, if you need to, for lack of a better word. So very humbling experience, but a really important experience, and just a reminder to sort of stay centered and, make sure that I'm on top of my own self-care practices, things that I encourage for people to do as well when I'm working with people. So quite the journey, but I wanted to record this episode today, to just give you some insight into where I've been and some context, but B, to give you an analysis of anxiety to help you if you're someone who's struggling with anxiety, and then also C, talk about the future of the show, which isn't going to be that different to what it's always been. It's just speaking to philosophers, spiritual teachers, psychologists, psychotherapists, really the intersection of psychotherapy, spirituality, and philosophy, but sort of dictated more toward people who are experiencing identity collapse after burnout and anxiety, which for obvious reasons is something that I'm quite interested in now. But I'm sure the show will take care of itself in the coming weeks. I'll keep doing some shows like this as well, just to give you guys some updates and things, and it won't always be interviews. But let's talk about anxiety now. So anxiety really is wisdom if you can learn to listen to it. It's a teacher. It's the body telling us that it is quite upset with how we are living our lives. Okay, anxiety, as I'm sure many of you know, is it's very necessary. It's important. It's an evolutionary strategy to keep us safe, to make sure that we run away from big scary things with big teeth, that we think twice before entering into caves, but also it can be overcome and it can be used as discernment, because perhaps what's in that cave, is not only a bear, but it's also food that could sustain the tribe. Now, we obviously don't live like that anymore. We live in a very fast-paced environment, most of us, and what gives us anxiety are many little bouts of sympathetic nervous system activation throughout the day. And if you're like me, pretty useless on my phone, that starts as soon as you wake up. You look at your phone and you check your notifications, and already you're getting a bit of cortisol and adrenaline bumping. Now, for me, I'd been living a very fast-paced life unbeknownst to me, unfortunately, for many years. Lots of studying, probably seeing too many clients, trying to take on too many projects, trying to have a social life and a family life outside of that. And my what's called allostatic loading just continued to accumulate until it popped. And that pop was a panic attack, which is basically where the nervous system begins to malfunction. It sensitizes is the word that we use. That sensitization basically has the individual, me, experiencing the world as inherently dangerous, right? So when my nervous system shifted into that sensitized state, I was looking at everything as if it were a war zone. Now, that can be really helpful if you are in a war zone, but I wasn't. I was actually quite safe in my home environment. So again, I was able to rely on my master's training, my clinical training, to work through that process without thinking I was going to go nuts, essentially, and just allow the body to, again, find its consistency, find its safety through slowing down. So in the beginning, there was a lot of breath work, there was a lot of crying, there was a lot of therapy, there was a lot of releasing tension that had been built up for so many years. It's the inward journey, right? Eventually that became meditation, and again, other things that I've written about on Substack, which again, I'll drop in the description below. But what's really helpful for you to know is whether or not you've experienced a burnout, whether or not you experienced high panic attacks or high anxiety, you can start to shift this now. And the best way to do it would be to develop a practice of actually just coming back into the body, really recognizing that the body is on your side. It doesn't want to feel stressed, because that burns a lot of calories, and it goes against our evolutionary wiring, which is to survive, right? It actually wants to thrive. It wants to feel safe. It wants to procreate, so things that we all kind of want, it wants to. So if you can start to develop a practice of getting in touch with your body, this is why somatic therapies are just so popular right now, because we see the limits of talk therapy, although that's a whole other discussion in terms of what talk therapy does for the body, especially when you're speaking with someone who's grounded and safe and can listen and can empathize. That does a lot to the body. But somatic therapies, in any case, are really popular because everyone wants to get into the body, because that's, as I'm sure you've heard, your issues are in the tissues, your body keeps the score, all these wonderful ideas. So the first thing that you really want to do is to get into the body, right? You can't trust the mind. You can't heal the mind with the mind, right? Another thought over a thought, especially when you're in this acute high anxiety, high stress, high panic phase, the worst thing you can do is try to use your mind to heal it. This is why it's really, really damaging to look for meaning, right? If you've experienced high anxiety, then you'll know what I'm talking about. High anxiety is akin to high uncertainty. So to balance that, what we try to find is a lot of uncertainty, right? A lot of certainty. We look for certainty wherever it is. And in this day and age, it's AI, right? A lot of clients tell me they're on AI all the time. Even when I was at my worst, I was trying my best to not look for reassurance, because I knew what that would do. Again, the irony of my training being the thing that led to this burnout, but also be the thing that really fast-tracked my recovery. Looking for meaning is a really corrosive, damaging thing for someone who's really highly anxious, because it reinforces that state of anxiety. You're basically saying to your anxiety, you need to be here, you need to stay around, right? Because I can't do this on my own. I need reassurance, I need you, all that kind of thing, okay? So as hard as it is in those initial weeks, and even perhaps the first month or two, the best thing that you can do is feel. Get into the body, dance, exercise lightly, breath work, that kind of stuff. Not too overwhelming, but start to ground the body in consistency. That also means going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, eating healthy foods, all that kind of thing. In the first couple of days, I couldn't eat, just to let you know. So I know how hard this is, okay? That panic was so visceral, so palpable. My body was in such a state of perceived danger that I couldn't eat. And like I said in the article, if you know me personally, you'll know how strange that sounds, because I love to eat. Okay. So you've just got to respect the fact that your body is taking care of itself. You've got to give all of your trust to the body. Okay. We need to really respect that it knows what to do, not this thing. Remember, we've wired this thing. I trained this thing to always be in the future, to think about 20 things at once, to go, right? The mind takes a while to catch up with the body. So when the body finally says, hey, enough, and it snaps, we've got to let that thing take control of the wheel. We've got to let this thing sit in the back seat. Now that's really hard, especially if you were like me, identified with the mind. Okay, so this is where down the line practices like meditation become really important, because you get to cultivate the witness or observer perspective. You get to sort of watch the mind without being identified with the mind. But that can come a bit later, and I would probably, this is something my wife and I often talk about when we run group coaching calls with the people we work with. It's probably not a good idea to meditate in the beginning, because it could actually make things worse, because you're so overwhelmed that going inwards can actually just really throw you in the abyss, so to speak. So use the body, get into the body. Of course, if this is really overwhelming for you, speak with a mental health professional. Okay, especially one grounded in somatic therapies, or someone who is interested in anxiety, or, but the most important thing is someone you feel safe with, someone you feel connected to. The research tells us that it's the relationship that heals at the end of the day. So that's the first thing. It's getting into the body, right? The second thing is, and really the third thing at the same time, is not to put timelines on this, right? Again, that's the mind's desire for certainty, okay? The body will do what it needs to do. But the third thing is forgetting this idea that you are going to be able to go back to who you were. Okay, I know that sounds a bit scary when you're confronted with this kind of suffering or trial or crucible even. I went through it, myself, right? This desire I wish I could just go back to how things were, right? That person is dead, and that's a good thing, because that's the person that created the state that you're in right now, okay? So what I really want you to think about is you're becoming someone new. You're becoming someone more authentic, more integrated, slower. It's going to feel unfamiliar. It still feels a little bit unfamiliar for me right now. I'm 5 months through. I would say, as best as a therapist can do, I've done as best I can, and it's fast-tracked it for sure. And that's a massive reason why I'm trying to be really honest here, is to help you, because I know what it's like, because I've worked with many people by now, who don't have maps for this, right? So it just feels really scary, but there are maps for this. There's lots of maps for this. I'm hopefully proof that you can actually get through this pretty quickly if you adhere to those maps, okay? But this is really important. You're not going to be able to go back to who you were. You're going to become someone better. You're going to become someone who's more integrated, who's calmer, who's more grounded, that kind of thing. My life feels far slower than it's ever felt right now, and that's a really good thing, but it still feels a little bit unfamiliar. But I know in time, this is going to become my new way of living, and that's what will be the case for you as well if you work through this. Okay, just remember that the person that one part of you wants to go back to being is also the same person that created this suffering. That person who was always lost in the future, who was always worrying about outcomes, who was obsessing over finer details or whatever it is, right? We don't want to be that person. So there's an existential shift that's going to happen here where you're going to touch back down to reality, but it's going to feel slower. It's going to feel more spacious. There'll be more time for presence and relationships, hobbies, life according to your own values, not someone else's deadlines. It's a very interesting experience, but this is why, I've called the article that I wrote on Substack, the wisdom of anxiety, right? It's encouraging you to come back to your true self, not the false self that, in my case anyway, was dictated by performance and deadlines and status and all that sort of thing. So the fourth and final thing that I would say, if you're navigating this, and again, there'll be more episodes on anxiety and burnout and identity collapse, and I really do encourage you to read some of the articles on Substack if this feels resonant to you. The fourth and final thing is start to just look for little seeds of joy. So when my body was pretty much calm enough to start to just sort of take life in again, I recognized that there was a desire to create, which is usually the case. People like to get creative after big experiences because it helps them integrate and consolidate. I started writing again. Now, in the beginning, it was 20 minutes and then I was really, really tired and I couldn't do much anymore because I was still in that letdown phase of anxiety. But 20 minutes became 40 minutes, 40 minutes became an hour. And again, I was very closely monitoring how my body was experiencing my new creative desires. And I went slowly, I worked with it, okay? But eventually, snippets of writing became articles. Articles became essays and so on. And now I'm back to doing some content creation, but it feels much more aligned, much more, sort of authentic, I suppose. So I'm actually happy that this happened. And I think that when I work with a lot of people who are on the other side of this too, they tend to say the same thing. So it's as hard as it is, especially when you're in the acute phase, and I can empathize with this because I was listening to podcasts and so on and, working with my therapist, and I was saying, I know I agree with what you're saying, but this experience is just terrifying right now. Body was shaking, heart was racing, couldn't eat, was getting blurry vision, all that kind of stuff. If you can at the same time recognize that although it's harrowing, it is also going to benefit you in some way. If you can just hold on to that hope and use faith, not necessarily in a spiritual or religious sense, but faith in this being something happening for you, not to you, it will eventuate that way. I am proof of that. I know I'm just N of one, obviously, but there's lots about people out there who have recovered from anxiety and it's been the best thing for them. So I would really recommend that you hold on to hope in that specific regard. Now, this is only going to be a little short update, but again, if you're interested in this, if you're someone who is anxious, who is exhausted, who is burnt out, who is stressed, who is actually experiencing panic attacks, who wants to rebuild a slower, more meaningful life that isn't predicated on the external, the status, the performance, all that kind of stuff, please consider following me on Substack. I'm going to continue to write on there, particularly targeting you if this lands. I'm going to keep recording podcasts, obviously, but it will have this leaning to it now because I think this is really important. I think especially in this day and age, everything is very fast and it's really, I would say, a non-starter that we all have self-care practices now. Otherwise, we're going to get lost in the machine. That's just my opinion anyway. But I'm sorry to leave you for 5 months. I obviously had some things I had to attend to, but I'm hoping that this is going to benefit our relationship as the listeners and as me, someone trying to figure life out as well, but also someone with some clinical training that hopefully can give you a bit of an insider. So we'll see where this goes. Again, please feel free to follow me on Substack. I'll post the links to some of the articles below that I alluded to in this episode, and I'll talk to you soon.